She tried to kill the Alpha King to avenge her family. Take her away, the Alpha commanded. The night was darker than usual, as if the stars themselves had been swallowed by shadow.
In the village beyond the northern woods, whispers spoke of a king whose name carried fear, whose gaze alone could bend men to his will.
He was called the Alpha King, Vale, ruler of the storm-tossed lands, a man whose power had grown from whispered legends and ancient bloodlines. Lyra crouched atop the crumbling stone wall that surrounded the royal city, her heart pounding like a drum in the silence. Her fingers gripped the hilt of her dagger, smooth and cold, a gift from her father before his death. He had been a skilled swordsman, a protector of the village, until the Alpha King's men had come in the dead of night. Lyra had watched her family fall, powerless to intervene, and the image had burned into her memory like fire. Tonight, the fire of vengeance guided her steps. The village had been silent, grieving, fearful, and now she carried that grief into the heart of the very fortress that had destroyed her life. Cloaked in black and moving like a shadow, she slipped past the guards, invisible in the night. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. Every rustle of her cloak seemed a warning. Yet nothing could deter her. Nothing could stop the blade she carried in her hand. The city was alive with muted whispers, the kind that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Torches flickered along the streets, casting dancing shadows that twisted like demons around the corners. Lyra's eyes never wavered. She knew the palace's layout. Years of careful observation, secret maps, and the lessons from her father guided her. One wrong step could mean death. One breath too loud, and the hunt that awaited her could turn into a tomb. Finally, she reached the inner walls. A palace loomed before her, like a mountain of obsidian and glass. Its towers pierced the clouds, and the banners of Vale's house flapped in the cold wind. There was no sound but the wind itself, yet she felt it, the weight of the kingdom pressing against her, the authority of the king emanating like heat from the stones. She clenched her jaw. She would not hesitate. Not tonight. The corridors inside the palace were silent, thick with the scent of wax and incense. The shadows pooled in the corners, and the sound of her soft steps seemed like thunder to her own ears. She had come too far to turn back. She crept along the walls, following the map etched into her memory, toward the chambers where the Alpha King slept, or so she believed. Her hand tightened around the dagger as she approached the door. It was massive, carved with sigils she didn't recognize but felt as if they were alive, pulsing with power. Lyra drew a steadying breath. Lyra drew a steadying breath. She could hear her own heartbeat, the blood rushing in her ears. With one swift push, she entered. The room was vast, lit by a single torch that flickered against the stone walls. A tall figure sat near the center, cloaked in shadows, yet she recognized him instantly. Vale, the Alpha King himself. His presence was overwhelming, not the kind born of fear, but of sheer, undeniable command. Even in stillness he seemed to move with the weight of storms. Lyra stepped forward, dagger raised, fury guiding her hand. "This is for my family!" she shouted, voice trembling with anger and grief. Vale's head lifted, and for a moment the firelight caught his eyes, piercing, ancient, and filled with something unexpected. Recognition. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he simply studied her. "You came," he said softly, his voice like steel wrapped in silk. "You are brave or foolish." Lyra lunged, every ounce of pain and rage fueling her strike. But Vale moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. In one fluid motion, he caught her wrist and pressed the dagger to the floor. She froze, the tip of the blade trembling under his strength. "Enough!" he commanded, and the air seemed to hum with his authority. Lyra struggled, yet she could not break free. His gaze held her, not with cruelty, but with something that made her stomach twist. Curiosity. Take her away. Vale said finally, his voice echoing in the chamber. Guards appeared from the shadows, silent as the night, and gently but firmly took hold of Lyra. She struggled at first, but his presence was a shadow that could not be broken. As they dragged her toward the dungeons, she could not stop staring at him. His eyes followed her every move, and in them she saw no hate, only a storm of power and thought she could not yet understand. Her chest tightened. This was not the enemy she had imagined, or perhaps it was, just one shrouded in mystery. The dungeon was colder than she expected, lined with stone walls that seemed to drink warmth from the air. Chains lay on the floor, though Vale did not order them used. He simply left her in the darkness, stepping back to the shadows from which he had emerged. Lyra sank to the floor, shivering, though it was not the cold that shook her. It was the questions, the doubt that crept into her mind like ivy. Why had he spared her? Why had he not struck her down? And in those moments when she closed her eyes, she felt it, a pull she did not understand, a strange and unwelcome fascination with the very man she had come to kill. Hours passed. The dungeon remained silent, save for the distant sound of the wind through the towers. Lyra's mind raced. She thought of her family, of the night she had lost them, of the life she would never reclaim. And yet, among the ashes of her grief, there was something new, a sense of being seen, even if only by him. A sudden sound broke the silence, the soft shuffle of footsteps. She tensed, expecting the guards, but it was not them. A single torch appeared at the end of the corridor, held by a figure cloaked in black. Vale approached, silent and commanding, until he stood before her. "You could have ended me," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of both warning and wonder. "And yet, here you sit."
Why?
Lyra looked at him, her chest heaving. "Because justice cannot wait," she said, though her voice sounded smaller than she intended.
"Because I cannot let what you did go unanswered." Vale studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing.
"You are full of fire," he said, almost to himself.
"And yet you are not what I expected. Not entirely." Lyra's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked, suspicion and curiosity mixing in her tone. "You carry grief and rage," he said slowly, stepping closer. "But you also carry something else, something that I cannot name, and it unsettles me. Desperate." She shivered. It was not just the cold. It was the intensity of his gaze, the way it seemed to pierce through the layers of anger she had built around herself. She realized with a mixture of fear and confusion that she had never met a man who could see her so completely and yet remain untouched by her wrath. For the first time since the night her family had died, Lyra questioned everything. The vengeance she had carried like armor suddenly felt fragile. And though she would never admit it aloud, she wondered if the very act that had brought her here, the attempt to kill him, had changed something in both of them. Vale's presence filled the dungeon like a storm waiting to break. Destering steps, he turned, gesturing toward the door. "Rest for now. We will speak more at dawn. Until then, know this. You are not merely a weapon, Lyra. I am a choice, and choices can bind destinies."
The guards led her back to her cell, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The words haunted her. "You are a choice."
Desert. She could not decipher whether it was a warning, a challenge, or a promise. Her anger, so long a compass, wavered. Outside, the wind howled through the fortress towers. The moon peeked from behind clouds, casting silver light on the stone walls. Lyra sat on the cold floor, dagger still clutched in her hand, and for the first time she felt the enormity of the path ahead. It was no longer just about vengeance. It was about survival, understanding, and perhaps, if fate allowed, something far more dangerous: trust. And as the night deepened, the Alpha King stood at the highest tower, looking toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn threatened the darkness. In that moment, both of them understood that the story had only just begun, that the clash of vengeance and power, grief and curiosity would shape more than their lives. It would shape the fate of a kingdom. For Lyra, the path of fire and shadow had only begun. And for Vale, the Alpha King, the girl who had tried to kill him, was no longer an enemy but a storm that could not be ignored. The night whispered around them, carrying the tension of what was to come. And somewhere in the darkness, destiny waited, patient and unyielding. The dungeon was silent, yet every stone seemed to hum with the pulse of the fortress. Lyra sat on the cold floor, her dagger beside her, eyes tracing the cracks in the walls as if answers might emerge from the shadows. Night had passed, but sleep had not come. Her mind replayed the king's gaze, the quiet intensity that had unsettled her more than any blade could. Why had he spared me? The thought echoed like a question without an answer. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the narrow slit of her cell, she had made one realization. The Alpha King, Vale, was not like any man she had faced. He commanded fear effortlessly, yet there was a strange vulnerability beneath his dominance, a depth she could not yet name, and it unsettled her. The door clanged open and a single guard appeared, not with chains but with a gesture. "The king wishes to speak with you," he said. Lyra's heart clenched. Speak with him? After last night, would she find her fury reignited, or would something else stir inside her? She was escorted through the twisting corridors, torchlight flickering along the walls. Vale's presence was like a shadow stretching ahead, long and impossible to ignore. Though he did not enter the room immediately. Instead, he waited, leaning against a stone pillar, silent and still, like a storm paused before breaking. "You have spirit," Vale said finally, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Most would have fled or broken by now. But you endure."
Lyra met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tension she felt.
Endurance is all I have. And vengeance.
Breath. He inclined his head slightly. Vengeance, he repeated, almost thoughtfully.
But tell me, do you understand the truth of what you chase? Breaths. I understand that my family was taken from me because of you.
Vale's eyes darkened, but not with anger. And yet, you survived the night.
You reached my chambers. You came closer than anyone else would dare. That courage and fury, it cannot be ignored. Tell me, why do you persist in believing what you have been told? His words were carefully measured, like a blade against silk. She wanted to lash out, but something in his voice made her hesitate. Was there doubt, even regret, behind his words? Could it be possible that the king she had come to hate was not the man she imagined? You spared me, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Why? Then, finally, he spoke. Because there is more to you than anger. And because, perhaps, I wish to see if your heart could survive the truth. The dungeon walls seemed to close in, but Lyra could not turn away from the intensity in his gaze. She had expected hatred, cruelty, punishment, not a challenge wrapped in shadow. And yet, the thought unsettled her more than any blade. Truth? She asked. And what truth would that be? Not everything is as it seems, Vale replied, stepping closer. Your family's death, the events that brought you to me, they are part of a larger design, one you cannot yet see, and you are not merely a weapon of vengeance.
Situation. That Dianite.
You are a choice, a decision that can shape much more than one life.
His words irritated her and intrigued her in equal measure.
A choice? And what choice would that be? To serve you?
To join you. Vale shook his head. No. To see clearly, to decide whether your hatred serves justice, or only continues the cycle of pain. The path you walk is perilous, Lyra. And if you cannot see its true shape, it will consume you. The weight of his words sank into her chest. She had carried grief and rage for so long that she had not considered what might lie beyond it. The notion that there could be a path beyond revenge frightened her as much as it fascinated her. Passed in the dungeon, each one a trial. Vale did not keep her confined in chains, but he did not grant her freedom either. She was allowed to walk the corridors under guard, to see the fortress from its shadowed corners. It was a subtle test, and she sensed it. Every glance, every word from him was measured, pushing her, probing her resolve. During one of these walks, they passed the great library of the fortress. Shelves of ancient texts rose like mountains, their spines worn with age. Lyra's eyes lingered on the books, her curiosity momentarily distracting her from the tension coiled in her chest. You would learn quickly, Vale said softly, reading her expression. But knowledge is dangerous. It can be used to save or to destroy. Lyra turned to him, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. Is that not what you do? You destroy and save as you choose? Vale's lips curved faintly, though his eyes did not waver. Perhaps. But I am bound by the weight of a crown, Lyra, and a curse older than this kingdom. Choices, even mine, are never without consequence. The mention of a curse caught her attention. A curse? She asked. Vale's gaze darkened. The blood that rules this kingdom is tied to something older than we are. Something that hungers for control and can twist even the strongest will. I fight it daily, yet it grows stronger. That is why you must be careful, and why I must watch you. Lyra absorbed his words, understanding for the first time that there was more at stake than personal vengeance. The Alpha King was not merely a tyrant. He was a man bound by forces far beyond her understanding, and yet her rage did not fully fade. Bah! She had to reconcile the man she had intended to kill with the one who stood before her, commanding and yet strangely human. Night came again, and with it a storm. Rain lashed against the fortress windows, and lightning cast the corridors in ghostly light. Vale appeared at her cell, unannounced. You are restless, he observed, voice low. Do you know why? Lyra's hands clenched her knees. Because I am not free. Because I am trapped in a place that smells of stone and shadow. Because I am angry at you. And at myself.
Anger is natural, but fear, essay, not.
Fear can teach you more than hatred ever will. You must learn to see what lies beyond what you think you know. She swallowed hard. The words struck her with an odd force, as if the storm outside had spoken through him. And what if I cannot see beyond my own pain? Then Vale did something unexpected. He reached out, just a hand's width from her, yet he did not touch. Then I will wait. And you will learn. Perhaps not by choice, but by necessity. Lyra's chest tightened. His presence was suffocating, magnetic, yet impossible to define. She had come to kill him, and now she found herself questioning the very foundation of her purpose. Rage warred with curiosity, anger with fascination. The days blurred into nights, and with each passing hour the tension between them grew. Their conversations became a dangerous dance, questions and answers layered with unspoken truths, challenges wrapped in veiled warnings. Lyra began to see that Vale's strength was not merely in his command but in his patience, in his ability to endure what others could not. One night, while the storm outside raged with a fury that mirrored her own turmoil, Vale spoke again, softer this time.
You have the strength to end me, he said. Yet you hesitate.
Why? Lyra's fingers tightened around her dagger, though she did not raise it. Because I do not understand you. And because I do not know if what I feel is hatred or something else entirely. Vale's eyes softened, though only just enough for her to see. Then perhaps the path ahead is not just about survival or vengeance, Lyra. Perhaps it is about choice, and choices are far more dangerous than any blade. The dungeon walls felt smaller, the shadows longer, the storm louder. Everything she had believed about him, about herself, about vengeance, was shifting. And she hated it. And yet, she could not turn away from the challenge he posed, nor from the strange pull she felt toward the man who had once been her target. That night, as lightning streaked across the sky, she lay on the cold stone floor, staring at the ceiling, and realized something terrifying. She had begun to care what would happen to him. And that thought, more than any blade, unsettled her completely. The Alpha King had commanded her capture, but he had also awakened something far more dangerous than fear or anger. A connection, a tension that neither could ignore. Both Lyra and Vale understood that the journey had only begun, and that the choices they made in the coming days would shape more than their fates. They would shape the fate of the kingdom itself. And somewhere in the shadowed corridors a whisper echoed through the stone. Destiny waits for no one, and the fire of hearts cannot be contained. The forest beyond the kingdom's northern walls was unlike any Lyra had ever seen. Shadows moved with a life of their own, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets older than the stones of the palace. Rain from the previous storm had soaked the earth, leaving the air thick with the smell of moss and wet leaves. Daylight, the forest felt alive, watching, waiting. Lyra trudged along the narrow path, her cloak pulled tightly around her. She kept her dagger at her side, not for offense, but for caution. Vale walked ahead, silent and deliberate, his presence commanding even in the quiet of the trees. Each step he took seemed to leave the ground trembling slightly, as if the forest itself recognized his power. You move carefully, Vale said, his voice breaking the silence. The forest knows who we are. It tests those who enter its heart. Ests or warns? Vale's lips curved faintly. Perhaps both. Magic lives here, old and cunning. We must be wary. The purpose of their journey weighed heavily on them both. The curse over Vale's bloodline had grown stronger. Shadows in the kingdom were restless. Whispers of rebellion and magic stirring in ways that threatened not only Vale but every life under his rule. Illyra had agreed to come, not out of trust, but necessity. The prophecy spoke of her role in breaking the curse, and though her heart had begun to waver from vengeance, she knew the stakes were far higher than personal revenge. The forest grew darker as they ventured deeper. The trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost human, their limbs reaching toward the travelers like silent guardians or hidden enemies. Lyra's pulse quickened. Even Vale, whose eyes missed nothing, glanced around, though his posture remained rigid, controlled. "You're tense," Vale said suddenly, stopping. "Do you fear what lies ahead, or do you fear yourself?" Lyra's hands tightened around the hilt of her dagger. "Both," she admitted. "I have learned that the closer I get to the truth, the more I question everything. My purpose, my choices, even you." Bile's gaze softened, though just enough to reveal a fleeting vulnerability. "I never asked for your trust," he said. "But I did not expect you to doubt the world so easily. You are stronger than you believe, Lyra. But strength alone will not break the curse." They pressed on, each step heavier than the last, until they reached a clearing where a stone altar rose from the ground, covered in moss and engraved with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Air hummed with energy so potent that Lyra felt her hair stand on end. "This is it," Vale said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The heart of the curse." Lyra studied the altar. "And we are supposed to?" Vale replied simply, "Together." The word "together" caused a ripple of conflict in her chest. She had once believed that he was her enemy. Yet here they stood, side by side, facing a force that neither could control alone. She glanced at him, and in the curve of his jaw, the steady rise and fall of his shoulders, she glimpsed the burden he carried. The Alpha King was not merely a figure of command. He was a man fighting an invisible battle, one that threatened his soul. Vale stepped forward, placing his hand on the altar. The runes flared brighter, shadows twisting around them as if the forest itself were alive and resisting. Lyra followed, placing her hand beside his. The energy shot through her like lightning, a jolt that left her breathless. The forest fell silent, holding its collective breath. "Do you feel it?" Vale asked, his voice steady despite the force pressing against him. Lyra nodded. "It's alive, hungry." "Yes," Vale said, "and it will feed on fear, on doubt. That is why we must trust each other. And you must trust yourself." For a moment the forest seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the curse itself, testing them, probing their intentions. Lyra's mind drifted for an instant to her family, to the night they had been taken, to the fire of vengeance she had carried so long. That fire had not diminished entirely, but it had changed. It was no longer blind rage. It had become focus, purpose, and courage. Vale's eyes met hers. "Do not fear the darkness within you, Lyra. It is part of what will save us both." Lyra swallowed hard. The words struck a chord deep inside her. She had always believed that anger was her greatest weapon. Now she realized it could be her strength, if she learned to control it. They began the ritual, speaking words from the old tongue, their voices echoing through the forest. Shadows writhed around them, twisting, forming shapes that were both familiar and alien. Breath. Lyra's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the undeniable connection she felt to Vale. They moved in harmony, two forces aligned against the curse. Suddenly, a surge of energy erupted from the altar. Lyra stumbled back, gripping Vale's arm to steady herself. The shadows recoiled, then lunged toward them, shapes of smoke and light that sought to consume. Vale's eyes blazed with power, and he raised his hand, summoning strength from the depths of his being. "Hold steady," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We end this, together!" Lyra's hands moved instinctively, weaving the spell with him, her anger and grief channeled into something greater than herself. Energy pulsed between them, a bond formed not of love yet, but of shared struggle and trust. The shadows shrieked and twisted, But slowly, as their combined power grew, the darkness began to break. The forest trembled. A lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating their faces. Lyra glanced at Vale, and for the first time she saw not the king she had come to hate, but a man fighting to survive, to protect his kingdom, to carry the weight of a curse older than any memory. And in that moment something fragile and dangerous stirred between them, a recognition that they were no longer simply adversaries. Each had seen the other's strength, courage, and pain. Each had begun to trust what had once been a stranger, a target, a threat. The curse's heart recoiled, sending a wave of energy that threatened to throw them apart. Lyra clung to Vale, their hands locking, their wills united. They poured every ounce of strength, every thought of survival, every fragment of grief into the ritual. Then, with a final pulse of light, the shadows shattered, dissipating into mist. The altar glowed briefly, then dimmed, its magic spent, or perhaps transformed. Silence fell, heavy and profound, as if the forest itself were exhaling after a long and terrible ordeal. Vale lowered his hand, his chest heaving, eyes locking with Lyra's. She was trembling too, exhausted, exhilarated, and overwhelmed. You did it, she whispered, hardly daring to believe. Vale's lips curved faintly. We did it, he corrected. Together, pressed. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Caught in the afterglow of battle, trust, and an unspoken bond that had formed in the heat of struggle. The forest seemed to hold its breath watching them, acknowledging that two hearts, so different and yet so alike, had faced a darkness older than both of them and survived. And yet, even in triumph, danger lingered. The shadows had retreated, but they had not vanished entirely. Somewhere beyond the reach of their eyes, a figure watched, waiting for the moment to strike again. The prophecy had not ended. It had only shifted. Vale's gaze softened as he turned to Lyra. You are not just a survivor, he said. You are a force. And now, you have seen what lies in the darkness, what we can face together. Lyra's hands shook, but not from fear, from the storm of emotion swirling within her. For the first time she understood the depth of the king's burden, the weight of the curse, and the power of their combined strength. And though she could not yet name it, a spark of something more flickered between them, a bond forged in fire, shadow, and struggle. The forest around them began to calm, the whispers fading into the wind. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling both fear and exhilaration. Indes, the anger that had once defined her, was no longer the only force in her heart. Now there was purpose, there was courage, and there was something far more dangerous, the possibility of trust, and the stirring of feelings she had not yet allowed herself to recognize. Vale looked at her, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes she glimpsed a faint shadow of relief. They had survived, yes, but the journey was far from over. The kingdom still waited, the shadows still lingered, and the choices they would make next could shape not only their lives but the fate of all who lived under the Alpha King's rule. Painting the forest in hues of crimson and gold, Lyra realized one undeniable truth. She no longer hated him. Not entirely. And that realization, more than any spell or battle, frightened her most of all. The forest whispered around them, carrying the tension of what was to come. Destiny was still waiting, patient and relentless, and somewhere, in the unseen corners of the world, a shadow stirred, a warning that the final trial had yet to arrive. The kingdom lay under a restless sky, where clouds churned like black waves over a sea of stone. Ash drifted through the air, carried on the wind from distant fires, remnants of skirmishes and unrest stirred by the curse, the forest's whispered secrets of dark sorcery. and the people spoke in hushed tones of the Alpha King and the girl who had dared to confront him. Lyra and Vale rode through the outskirts of the capital, their horses' hooves clattering against wet cobblestones. They had returned from the forest where the curse had nearly claimed them, and yet the true enemy had not yet revealed itself. The sorcerer who had manipulated events from the shadows, the architect of her family's death, still lived. And he had grown more dangerous with each passing day. Vale's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon. He no longer moved with the detachment of a distant ruler. The past trials had tempered him, and now he bore the weight of responsibility, knowledge, and a bond he could not yet name. "You have changed," Vale said quietly, his voice carrying over the soft rain that had begun to fall. "The girl who came to kill me. She is no longer the same." Lyra glanced at him, her cloak damp, eyes reflecting both exhaustion and determination.
"Nor are you," she replied. "You fight not just for your crown, but for the people, and even for me, I think." Vale's gaze softened for the briefest instant, then hardened as his jaw clenched.
"We have no time for reflections. The sorcerer waits at the old fortress beyond the northern cliffs. He believes he has us cornered. But we will see who truly commands the shadows." Perilous. The journey was long and perilous. Along the way they encountered remnants of the curse's influence, twisted creatures, the echoes of magic that had once threatened the kingdom. Lyra's dagger and Vale's power moved in harmony as they defended themselves, but each battle reminded them of the fragility of life, the closeness of death, and the strength born from trust. At last, the northern cliffs rose from the earth like jagged teeth. The fortress there, ancient and abandoned, radiated dark energy.
Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating its broken towers and shattered gates.
The air itself seemed alive with anticipation.
"This is where it ends," Vale said, dismounting and gripping his sword tightly.
"Are you ready?" Lyra nodded, though her heart pounded. "I am."
Whatever it takes, together they approach the fortress.
Destrish. Shadows twisted unnaturally around the broken stones, as if the walls themselves were alive.
The sorcerer emerged from the darkness, tall and cloaked, a staff of blackened wood in his hand.
His eyes gleamed with malice and cunning. "So," he sneered, voice echoing like thunder in the hollow halls. "The little girl who tried to kill the king and the king himself. Together at last. How touching." Vale stepped forward, the storm of the skies seeming to bend toward him.
"Your game's end now. Release the kingdom from your curse, or face the consequences."
The sorcerer laughed, a sound that cut through the wind like a knife. "Consequences? You think you can challenge me? The curse was never mine to control alone. It belongs to the shadows, and the shadows obey no king." Chiss. Lyra drew her dagger, stepping beside Vale. For the first time, she realized that the man she had once sought to kill was now her ally, her companion, and perhaps something more. Together they radiated a strength neither possessed alone. The tension between them was unspoken but electric, a bond forged in fire, shadow, and shared danger. The battle began. The shadows erupted from the walls, writhing like living smoke. The sorcerer's staff sent waves of dark energy toward them, yet Vale met each attack with calm precision, his sword a blur of movement and force. Lyra moved alongside him, her dagger flashing, her mind and instinct sharper than ever before. At one point, a shadow lunged at Vale, and without hesitation, Lyra intervened, striking it down with a precise blow. Then in that instant, recognition passed between them. a silent acknowledgement that neither would survive without the other.
You have grown, Vale said,
His voice low.
low, almost a whisper amid the chaos.
Lyra's lips curved faintly. I had a good teacher. The sorcerer unleashed a final massive surge of magic, sending a shockwave through the fortress. Stones cracked, and the air filled with smoke and ash. Lyra and Vale were thrown back, but their hands found each other, fingers locking. Together, they pushed forward, their strength and resolve combining like fire and steel. Lyra's heart raced as she channeled all her energy into a spell she had learned during their forest journey, one designed to counter the curse and bind the sorcerer's power. Vale's sword moved in tandem, striking precise blows that disrupted the dark energy around them. The shadows screamed, twisting violently as the combined force of light, courage, and magic pressed against them. Lyra felt the strain in every muscle, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Yet she did not falter. She could not. Not now. Finally, with one final surge, the sorcerer's power shattered. The shadows dissolved into mist, carried away by the wind. The fortress trembled, then fell silent. The storm above began to calm, the clouds parting to reveal a pale hint of dawn. Vale lowered his sword, chest heaving, eyes scanning the ruined fortress. It is done, he said quietly. Lyra sank to her knees, exhaustion overwhelming her. She looked at Vale, and for the first time, the tension between them, the unspoken bond, the trust, the respect, became undeniable. She realized how far she had come, how her heart had shifted from vengeance to something greater, loyalty, understanding, and perhaps love. Vale knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair from her face.
You were remarkable, he said, voice soft.
Battle, but in courage, in heart. You have changed not only your fate, but the kingdom's. Riza's eyes glistened, though she did not look away. I could not have done it alone, she whispered. They rose together, standing amidst the ruins. Dawn broke fully, washing the world in gold and silver light. The kingdom was scarred, yes, but the darkness that had threatened it had been defeated. For the first time, hope seemed possible. Vale extended his hand, and Lyra took it without hesitation. Their fingers entwined, and in that simple gesture, years of fear, anger, and uncertainty fell away. They were no longer king and intruder, enemy and target. They were partners, allies, and perhaps something deeper. The wind carried the smell of rain and ash. Birds began to stir in the distant forests, singing as if heralding a new beginning. Vale and Lyra stood at the edge of the cliff overlooking the kingdom. The sun rose fully, illuminating a land that had endured shadow and storm, but was now ready to heal. Vale's voice was low, almost lost in the wind. Pal, you came to kill me once, and yet, here we stand, together.
Lyra's lips curved faintly, the memory of rage fading into relief and pride.
Desperate. And yet, we survived. Together. They stayed there, side by side, watching as the first rays of sunlight bathed the kingdom in warmth. The curse was broken, the enemy defeated, and their hearts, once separated by anger and vengeance, had found a connection forged in trial and trust. Vale turned to her, eyes reflecting the light of the rising sun. The kingdom will remember this day, he said. The girl who tried to kill the Alpha King, and the king who chose her trust over fear. Together we have changed the fate of all who live here. And perhaps we have changed each other as well. A gentle breeze swept across the cliffs, carrying away the last traces of ash. The kingdom, though scarred, would rise stronger. And for Vale and Lyra, the trials they had endured had forged something enduring, Not vengeance, not fear, but trust, courage, and a bond that neither darkness nor power could undo. The wind whispered around them, carrying the promise of dawn, of renewal, and of destiny fulfilled.
The Alpha King and the girl who had once sought to end him now stood united, ready to face whatever the world might throw at them next, together.
In the quiet aftermath of storm and shadow, Lyra realized that the path she had walked, from vengeance to trust, from grief to courage, had brought her something far greater than she had ever imagined. Brandon, and as she stood beside Vale, the light of dawn illuminating their faces, she understood that some connections, forged in the fire of trials and the shadow of darkness, could never be broken. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt hope, but caught her. Not the fragile hope of waiting for justice, not the fleeting hope of survival, but the enduring hope of hearts that had endured shadow and fire, and emerged stronger, unbroken, and ready to face the future together. And the kingdom, scarred but alive, remembered them both. The Alpha King and the girl who had tried to kill him, as the ones who had faced the darkness and chosen the dawn.